Hi everyone, it's William. It's cold here today, for me at least, and the sun is interfering. But as you can see, there's sunshine, it's not raining, so it's not quite a day to sit inside by the fire and write poetry. But poetry is certainly the theme of the day. So, as you know, Dmitri did not have a career as a poet. And the poetry that he was writing in the form of poetical prose when he was 16 years old was promising, but not, he was never going to be the Mozart of poetry, which, so it said, his little brother did have that kind of extraordinary promise, but Dmitri could have pursued writing, if not poetry, then literary prose, and he didn't. That was his choice. Yeah, for whatever reason. But as we continue to look at both 1907 and 1921 diary entries, I invite you to consider whether that boy has grown into that man. That's a clumsy way to put it, but whether we still see that 16-year-old boy who looks at things with such wistfulness and longing and melancholy in the 29-year-old man. All right. So before we dive in, and this is the last part of the long diary for entry for the 11th of September, 1907, and I'm happy to say that we will be continuing on with September. And all of the diaries are long and packed with information. All of the diary entries, they're not all poetic. This was something clearly that came and go along with his mood on any given day. But yeah, they're all packed with information. And I actually had wondered if Nicholas and Alexandra were in Crimea that September, if they were at Levadia, as was their custom, as far as I know, to go there in September. But looking through Dimitri's diaries for the rest of the month yesterday, I saw that he definitely was not, or they definitely were not. So the only reference to them, which is in the next diary entry for the 12th, is to the girls, as Dmitri continues to tell us about what he doesn't like about the four Grand Duchesses, the four little girls. But that is in the context of comparing them to other children, and not there's no reference to them or their parents being in the Crimea at this time. But oh well, there are a lot of other Grand Dukes and Grand Duchesses there. Okay, so I also wanted to start by citing the famous Pushkin poem, The Poor Knight. But I couldn't find a translation of it that I liked online, and I myself am not up to translating it so that it's something that I like, or better than the other translations that are out there. And in fact, there was a little bit for me today reading this and translating it. Yeah, asking myself, since Dmitri clearly wanted it to be poetic, what form I should put it in to bring that across. And as I say, I'm not a translator of poetry, so you'll have to bear with me if the English is not as lovely and poetic as he saw the Russian as being. Okay, but The Poor Knight. So The Poor Knight was by Pushkin, and it described a knight during the time of the Crusades who was, what's the word? He was devoted to and longed for the Virgin Mary, as she's called in the Greek Orthodox Church, the Theotokos, the Mother of God. And he was so devoted to her that he didn't pray to anyone else. He only prayed to Maria. And when he died, he emblazoned her initials on his shield, and he always wore a rosary next to his heart. And in his devotion to her, he decided never to lift the visor of his helmet in public. And when he died, without confession, he was quite an isolated person in the end, the demons came to get him because they said, well, he never prayed. He never prayed, that is, to God. He never prayed to Jesus. He never prayed to the Holy Trinity. But Mary, of course, seeing what a devoted servant he was to her and how he longed for her, she intervened and she took him to heaven. So a very nice poem. And I'm sure Dmitri was familiar with it. I first found out about it not from reading Pushkin, but from reading Dostoevsky's famous novel, The Idiot, where that poem is used to tease Prince Mishkin, who is this kind of pure-hearted figure. So I have no idea, but I would assume that Dmitri was familiar with the poem, if not from Dostoevsky, then from Pushkin himself. And whether it ever had any resonance for him, not because of the Theotokos, the Virgin Mary, but because of his sister Maria. Well, certainly not now, certainly not in these 1907 diary entries. Well, maybe starting to head in that direction, but when he was an adult, in the video I'm going to do today from his 1921 diary entry, and he and his sister have gotten very close, you can see that, yeah, there is a certain amount of devotion there. At least at that particular time, they would sometimes be at odds with each other. And yeah, if somebody had teased him the way they teased Prince Mishkin with Pushkin's poem, the Poor Knight, I think he would have seen the humor in that. I think it would have made him laugh. But I guess that's something for the novel, because he certainly doesn't say anything like that in his diary entries. Anyway, let us dive into the poetic ending of this diary entry. If you think about it, there are such beautiful places here. For instance, Alupka, gray, sad, clad in green ivy, which, like a boa constrictor, wraps itself around its prey, around trees, walls. It doesn't care what it embraces, it just needs to embrace. These gloomy towers made of the same gray stone, these pipes carved into minarets, all of this somehow smells of the Middle Ages. There, in one location between houses where the ivy forms a narrow passage, one longs to see a mounted knight clad in armor. And Dulber, how sweet! All white and buried in greenery, it peeks out from behind the garden like a snowdrift, so pure, so white. Yes, one cannot say everything one would like to. It's time to stop. One must know when to stop. I'll start writing today and try to finish this book, and now to rest. Tomorrow we'll pray for Mama in the church there. Then have breakfast at Aunt Minnie's, 9:45, so you can see what a contemplative mood he's in. And a good one. I wouldn't say depressed, I would say wistful. All right, Dulber, just a reminder, was the estate that belonged to Grand Duke Pyotr Nikolaevich and was used also by his brother Nikolasha and the two Montenegrin princesses. And yeah, I've looked at a picture of it online. I don't remember it being covered in greenery, but okay, maybe it was then. Mama, Dimitri's mother, I think this must be the anniversary of her death, or leading up to it, because they're going to go specifically and pray for her with Aunt Minnie, who was her sister. And in this instance, Dmitri does not make any of the comments he's made in the past about not being in the mood to pray, having a hard time praying. This time I think he very sincerely wants to pray for his mother. So this is the practice in the Orthodox Church, and I'm certain also in the Roman Catholic Church, but not in most Protestant churches, where you pray for the dead, and in a sense to the dead. I don't want to say anything too controversial, but the idea isn't to help the dead out of purgatory, because there is no Orthodox purgatory. The idea, as I understand it, is to simply be in a kind of loving communion with that person, and acknowledging that for Christians, even after physical death, we are all alive in Christ, and therefore we can exchange love with the people that we love, whether they're here in the flesh or not. And I find that personally very appealing. Yeah. So anyway, he's going to pray for his mother, and if his experience is like mine, it will make him feel more genuinely connected to her. So let's talk about the poetry. Well, I did want to mention the word pipes, where he says these gloomy towers made of the same gray stone, these pipes carved into minarets. Well, clearly he did not want to use the word towers twice. Being a young poet of good instinct, he did not want to do that. So this other word, pipes, truba, leaves something to be desired. I guess you could look at a minaret and say it's like a giant pipe that's been carved into a minaret, but yeah, gloomy towers works much better than pipes carved into minarets. What really interests me about this is the metaphors he's using and what they mean in relation to what he's telling us about himself. So, as a novelist, I certainly know that when you write any book, you are revealing any work of fiction, any poem. I suppose it creeps into nonfiction too, but you're revealing so much about yourself. Even if you're writing about, some alien species on another planet 500 years in the future, you're still essentially writing about yourself. That is to say, if it's good writing, if it's a good book. If you're not writing about yourself to some extent, then it's not going to be a good book, in my opinion. And so Dmitri, as he presents us with this poetic prose, I think is telling us a little bit about himself. Maybe it's a stretch. You are more than welcome to guffaw at that idea. But what are the two metaphorical images he uses? One is a boa constrictor, and one is a snowdrift. So they could hardly be further apart from each other. And even though snakes do have some very positive mythical connotations and symbolic imagery, boa constrictors, not so much. So we can follow how this idea came into his head, looking at the ivy that was growing everywhere around trees, up walls, and thinking, oh, it's like a snake. And then he even uses the word prey. It wraps itself around its prey before talking about the trees and the walls. But then here's this beautiful line. Well done, Dmitri, he says. It doesn't care what it embraces. It just needs to embrace. All right. Yeah, that's deep. I love that. And I hope you will continue on and watch the video for the 1921 diary entry today, and watch the one from yesterday if you haven't already. because here we find precisely a man who doesn't care what he embraces, he just needs to embrace. And what I'm saying about he doesn't care what I mean is he doesn't care what kind of woman, as long as she gives him the family, the cozy family life that he wants. It can be a woman from, a non-royal woman. That's what he's concerned about. He's concerned about if he's going to play this role as the future ruler of Russia, he needs to have a suitable wife. But at this point in his life, he's very much telling us that he doesn't care what woman he embraces, he just needs to embrace. So come back for that video. But a boa constrictor, okay, yeah, that's a little bit negative, isn't it? So what's he saying about that in relation to himself? Does he have a sense that he's too needy, and that when he has a connection to someone, he just wants to squeeze beyond what is perhaps even comfortable for them? I'm not talking about in a sexual sense, but in an emotional sense. Does he have, as a 16-year-old who's very, very interested in not so much girls, but women, not girls his own age, but older women, does he have this sense that that the feelings that he has, or the thoughts that they bring to mind, make him a little bit a little bit like a snake? I'm not saying in any kind of way that wouldn't be typical for a 16-year-old boy, one who has Dimitri's mindset, where he's often prone to guilt and thinking, well, the kind of embraces I want from this woman I shouldn't want. And so that's where the negative imagery comes in. So the next image of the snowdrift, which he describes as so pure, so white. Well, this is a completely other presentation of himself, if we accept that he's telling us about himself. That he still has that childlike part of him that's pure, and yeah, very sweet. How sweet, all white, buried in greenery. The greenery is preserving the innocence, the pureness of the snowdrift. So that is really all I have to say today. I guess one of the things, at the spur of the moment, I had forgotten, but I guess one of the things that made me think of the poor knight was this fantasy of his of seeing a mounted knight in armor riding down one of these narrow ivy-clad passages. So I'll leave you with that image, and I should say, here I am, playing the literary intellectual and talking about the boa constrictor and the snowdrift, but overlooking the night. So is this somewhere in between the boa constrictor and the snowdrift? It's a very masculine image, and the knight would be a man of action, the sort of man that Dimitri admired. So I will leave you with that image, or rather with those three images: the boa constrictor, the snowdrift, and the knight. And next time we will learn a little bit more about those troublesome daughters of Nicholas and Alexandra, and more about what this very interesting young man has to tell us. All right, bye.